What you're saying, Jesse, is that we are seeing a sprawling tapestry of insiders using their connections and knowledge from within NATO's procurement apparatus to divert public funds into their own coffers.
Follow the money.
This is the podcast of the European investigative newsroom Follow the Money. I'm your host, Emma de Chatinier, recording from Brussels. And as always, I'm joined by Follow the Money reporter and my co-host, Alexander Fanta in Vienna. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Emma. Hi.
In this episode, we're looking at a corruption scandal in the world's most powerful military alliance, NATO. In May, arrests were made and sprawling bribery probes made international headlines. But just a few months later, the Trump administration suddenly dropped two of those cases. And Alex, before we go into the case itself, it's been quite the year for NATO, hasn't it?
Indeed. Trump blew like a whirlwind over the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and reshuffled quite a lot of things. So the Trump administration has been putting a lot of pressure on other NATO allies, especially in Europe, to increase their defense spending amid the war in Ukraine. So Ukraine has obviously been the shadow that looms over much of NATO's defense activities. So overall, countries across Europe have acted on Trump's pressure, have ramped up spending. So an exciting year, definitely.
And in the middle of all that, a corruption scandal. And to dive deeper into that, we're joined by the story's two authors, Follow the Money's Simon van Dorpe and Jesse Pinster, who revealed how the US's rule of law crisis has now come very close to Brussels. Welcome, Jesse and Simon.
Thanks for having us.
Before we dive into this week's topic, a little disclaimer. So we're talking about ongoing legal cases here, as well as legal cases that have now been dropped, which means that we're merely talking about suspicions of criminal acts here and not about proven legal wrongdoings. With that being said, Simon, could you start by telling us what you revealed about this corruption case?
Yes, corruption cases, Emma, we should say, because so we revealed details about 4 corruption cases that are all somehow linked to the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, NSPA. So there are 2 cases in the United States, one in Belgium and one in the Netherlands, a total of 11 suspects, more or less 2 million euros in alleged bribes that have been paid. And what are these cases about? Broadly speaking, I think, so there's a range of contracts for military equipment and services, going from ammunition to services for ships and planes, fuel, helicopters, drones. And the suspicion is that confidential information from inside the NSPA, and in one case also the Dutch Ministry of Defense, would have been passed to consultants and defense companies in exchange for bribes. So that's what we're talking about. And I think another important part of our investigation is that the 2 American cases were suddenly and inexplicably dropped in July.
And how did this whole scandal start? How did you first know about it?
I think we have to start in mid-May somewhere, a Monday and a Tuesday, when most of these people, to be precise, were arrested in several different countries. So you had this guy bringing his kids to school who was arrested in Switzerland. You had arrests on the airport in Brussels. And afterwards, there were some press releases by the prosecutors saying like, okay, we arrested some people. So that happened in mid-May. And I remember like reading it and I was like, okay, this is going to take like a couple of days or weeks before most of the things that are happening will be out in the open. I mean, it seemed like such a big story. So we kind of put it aside back then. I mean, we talked about it, but really didn't start investigating it. And then a couple of months ago, I kind of realized that nothing much came to light yet. So I basically started mapping the network, like putting all the pieces of information together, see how these people might have been connected. And I made a little diagram about that. I shared that with Simon, and I think we really picked up pace when Simon started to really look into it as well.
What did you find, Simon, when you started looking into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key piece of information that Jesse found was the name of the main suspect in the Belgian investigation. And so, doing some open source research with that name, we bumped into a former consultancy where this person also worked, and we saw that the owner of this consultancy was another former NSPA official named Scott Willison, an American citizen. And then we bumped into an indictment from the US, which had been released this year. So this Scott Willison was a suspect in a major US bribery investigation. And so we started digging into these documents in the US docket. So these are actually open documents. I mean, you have to know a bit how to deal with this system, how to find everything. But it turned out indeed that this person had been in jail in Switzerland for 2 months, but that the case was dropped, suddenly in July. So that's really where we started to understand that this may be much bigger than just the Belgian and the Dutch investigations.
So it's not like you used secret documents that were given to you. All the information that you used in doing this investigation was public information.
Originally, but then we also started speaking to sources, and we also teamed up, important to say, around that stage after we found the American documents. We teamed up with La Lettre, Le Soir, and Knack, and from there we could rely both on public documents but also on sources that each of us had.
What connects all these cases is the fact that they took place within NATO's procurement agency, the NSPA. And what should we know about the NSPA?
So a bigger part is actually sometimes individual, but most of the times several NATO members working together through that NATO agency to buy stuff they need for their armies. That's basically it. It's based in Luxembourg, somewhere in a small village just outside of the capital. So it's kind of far away from even from the headquarters of NATO in Brussels. And you got almost 1,700 people working there. So that's give you a general idea about what they're about and how big they are.
And who are the key people that we should really understand in this story? Who are the key figures involved?
If we just focus on the US indictment that Simon is talking about, so you have this Willison guy, and the second guy, and that's a really interesting one in the US papers that Simon found, that was a Turkish citizen. He also was working at the NSPA at some stage until 2020. Willison, we talked about, that was his boss at the time. So those were the two main people in those documents. And why do I say that? Ismail Terlemes, who is the Turkish citizen, is such an interesting case, is that after he left the NATO department, the procurement, he started a defense company in Turkey called Arka. And within just, 5 years, that company has grown and is now the second largest Turkish defense company. If you look at the exports, it's just in the first 5 months of this year, it has been 600 million. That's basically the same as they did in the last couple of years. And remember, they started only 5 years ago. So we're not talking about just some employees at NATO. We're talking about people who really became a part of the top of the defense industry. But maybe if you allow me to jump to one more case where it gets even more interesting, it turned out that there was another investigation by the US going on, and this was into a Romanian corruption case, if I can call it that way. What happened there is that a Romanian company, which is run by two Greek businessmen, tried to bribe an SBA official again.
This company is also owned by Turkish people. So in that sense, there's also a strong Turkish link to that case. So to both cases that were dismissed was a strong Turkish.
And this indictment is even a more interesting read because there's pictures in there as well of big stacks of euro bills.
So what you're saying, Jesse, is that we're seeing a sprawling tapestry of insiders using their connections and knowledge from within NATO's procurement apparatus to divert public funds into their own coffers.
Yeah, what you basically see, the American case that's really detailed in those papers is started in 2019. So at that stage, Willison already left. So he has a private consultancy. But this Terlemes guy, he's still working there. So what we see in those papers is that an Italian defense company who wants to get a contract from NATO, ammunition in this case, is helped by this consultant, this private consultant. You say, like, I know how this works. I'll figure it out for you. And in the indictment, you see like payments going to this consultancy. This is all fine. I mean, they're buying services from him. But what also happens, there's also a payment to Terlemes, who's still a NATO employee at the time. So if you count it all together, it was like, I think 115,000 euros in about 5 or 6 installments that went to this Terlemes guy. And what the suspicion is that basically you got someone on the inside telling, like, okay, giving information how the whole contract is going to look like and how to best make your offer that it's within those lines.
In addition to that, there's also a charge that Terlemes, the Turkish, who was still NSPA official, he steered a Latvian company which wanted to also sell ammunition to NATO to his friend and consultant Scott Willison. And then a few days, actually an hour after he did that, Willison called this Latvian CEO of this company. And they met in a hotel in Luxembourg, and he made him an offer, and he said, actually, you can double your prices. You can significantly increase your prices and still get those NATO contracts. And the deal was that he would receive half of the price increase, the consultant. So that was another set of allegations in the U.S. indictment.
In a sense, it's a classic kickback scheme, isn't it? You scratch my back and I will scratch yours.
Yes.
And in what time frame did this all happen? Was it all very much one after another, or what time frame are we talking about exactly?
It's all within a few months. So these facts date back to 2019, 2020. So it dates back a while, and it's not a question why it took so long to get that case indicted. Because other cases we saw were very quick, within a matter of weeks, from the evidence to the indictment, it went very fast.
Because it wasn't until this year, 2025, that the suspects actually got prosecuted.
Correct. Yes. So that's indeed where it gets really interesting. So this case is really pick up. There's the indictment in 2025, but that's all under seal. So that's secret. These suspects have no idea that they're involved in some legal case. And then you see in May 2025, so that is on the same date as the Belgian and Dutch police operations. So 12th and 13th of May, you see that Ismail Terlemes and Scott Willison are arrested. Terlemes in Belgium when he was on a visit to Brussels, and Willison as he was driving his kids to school in Lugano in Switzerland.
So we have various corruption cases with very serious allegations. We have a few people in jail. And then what your story found is that after all this, all of a sudden, in the midst of summer, the US dropped these cases. And what happened there, Simon?
Well, we don't know exactly what happened there. I mean, mid-May, basically the Trump administration is still, full on pursuing these cases, arresting these people or sending arrest warrants to Belgium. So these people are in jail for about 2 months. And then on the 9th of July, you see that they are suddenly released. So the cases get dismissed.
Despite the Americans asking for the extradition originally. So these people are in jail waiting to be transferred to the US.
Exactly. And in one case that was going to happen on the 11th of July. So like everything was kind of ready to move forward with these cases. And then on the 9th of July, you have this sudden dismissal. So that was really a big question mark for us and a really hard one to crack. But it's interesting. There are a couple of signs that, because we put these documents to a number of former Department of Justice officials, and what they all agreed on, so 4 people, what they agreed on was that these were strong cases. So you had pictures of cash, you had obviously recordings and informants who really gathered evidence. Then second element is that, they must have been working on this for years. But the second element is that they were dropped on the same day.
When you say they were dropped on the same day, you mean the Romanian case, right?
Yes.
And the case against Telemes.
The Telemes case. So were dropped on the 9th of July, which one official said that's like lightning striking your house twice in one day. It's very rare that a case like this, such strong evidence, gets dismissed so late in the process. And that it happens to 2 cases at the same time. That's really bizarre. So, I mean, they could exclude these people that this had nothing to do with a plea deal. What you see sometimes is that, they make an agreement between the defense and the prosecutors. Okay, we admit some guilt and there's some, okay, this was clearly not like that. And the paperwork would have looked differently. This was also not like a turnaround in sort of evidence or jurisdiction, or suddenly the prosecutors realizing that their arguments were not so strong. So, I mean, one of the officials, 2 of the officials actually came to the conclusion, look, this is really strong indications of political interference. And then there was one additional element to back up that claim, namely that the documents were not signed, the motion to dismiss was not signed by the people who were actually working on these cases for so long, the attorneys who would normally sign any kind of paperwork linked to the cases. It was signed by the Assistant Attorney General, so Gail Slater, in this case, who is like, politically very close to Trump. She worked for J.D. Vance just a year before joining the Department of Justice. She worked for Fox Corporation, so she signed it together with her counsel, her private counsel, which is very rare. I mean, it's not normal that her counsel would sign this in. Those are all elements to show, look, this is highly unusual, and it looks like strong political interference.
When you say that, does that mean it has Trump's handwriting all over it? Is it a political thing?
I think, now we enter into the realm of, speculation. I think there are 2 possibilities. One is that this is sort of a policy. And the policy in that case would be, we're not going after corruption cases anymore. And there are actually a lot of elements to support that thesis. You see that the department that deals with corruption inside the US has been decimated from 36 to 2 prosecutors in a matter of months. So they're just not doing that kind of stuff anymore. You also see that this foreign bribery, where the US used to be really strong in doing these cases in Africa, in Europe, as soon as there's a link with like US taxpayer money, which here obviously, US is the biggest contributor of NATO. I mean, Trump has been complaining about this a lot, the Europeans should pay up and they're not paying enough. And then when you actually have a number of Europeans who paying bribes to advance the interests of some European companies, I mean, this would be great America First case in a way.
So why do you think they're not following this line of logic with what you just described, that it would be a great corruption case actually for the US?
Because they just seem to completely ditch corruption enforcement. And if they would still decide, okay, let's still take this case on, or another possibility, because what we see is that until mid-May, when they made these arrests, this case was moving forward very quickly. They did a lot of things, a lot of actions in the first half of this year. That was all done under the Trump administration. So you had, some of these same people who dismissed the case were signing documents. So there must have been a sudden change. What we saw is that there was a meeting between Trump and Erdogan on the 24th of June in The Hague at the sideline of the NATO conference there. We asked both the Turkish NATO ambassador and the White House what was discussed during that meeting. They haven't responded. So it's hard to say, but, I think it wouldn't be out of this world. I think if we see how Trump approaches several other cases, it wouldn't be completely crazy to think that they somehow made a deal over this as well.
Doesn't really look good for Turkey, right? To have one of its big defense CEOs in jail somewhere. So it might have come from the Turkish side that they found this important. But again, like Simon said, it's kind of speculation because it's really hard to pin down.
Speaking about that, what role does Turkey and the Turkish defense industry play in this whole story?
Turkey is a NATO country. So they're part of the alliance, and they've seen their defense industry, which was already quite sizable, grow very fast over the last few years. Ukraine plays a part in that, but also a lot of exports to countries in the Middle East as well. So, I mean, it's really, I think it's now within the top 10 of countries in the world that, if you look at the size of their defense industry. So that makes it an interesting and an important player, I would say.
And is Turkey also benefiting from this overall trend of increased defense spending? Does that make the industry in Turkey boom even more?
I would say so. I mean, it's a little bit complicated because there's some EU funds involved, and then the Greek government will push back a bit on giving that money to Turkish companies because of the animosity between those two countries. But no, I would say, I think there were even cases that the US basically got their ammunition they gave to or sold to Ukraine. They got it from Turkey. So yeah, it's really part of that whole system. Yeah.
But you can imagine that Erdogan apparently has this sort of leverage over Trump then to make him to have him make a decision like this one.
They have a lot of ties. They're signing a lot of deals. They were discussing military cooperation in that meeting. So yeah, Turkey is, a lot of those weapons from the Turkish defense industry go to the US, including explosives, ammunition. A lot of US military equipment is going to Turkey, including F-35s. They signed a major deal. So yeah, there's a lot of cooperation between those countries.
And if we're talking geopolitics, Turkey also holds a very special relationship with Russia. So, I mean, Trump, who wants to be this peace president, solving all wars in a matter of days, I can imagine that he kind of holds a special position in that regard as well.
So there may be a geopolitical angle to this case in that sense. But more broadly speaking, what message does it send to the world when the US just suddenly drops corruption cases like these?
I mean, Virginia Cantor of the Democracy Defenders Action, she said it means you're going to let corruption run free. That's the signal that the US administration is sending with the dismissal of this kind of cases, and with the dismissal, frankly, of quite some other cases inside and outside of the US in recent months.
This of course, all comes at a time when the like you mentioned already in the beginning, Emma, that the defense spending is increasing very, very fast. That same summit in The Hague, where Erdogan and Trump met, the alliance agreed to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. That's the target for 2035. That means, and I looked it up because a think tank, CIPRI, who deals with these kind of issues, they calculate that that's 1.4 trillion dollars a year, which all the members will be spending. I mean, you want to be sure that that money is spent well. And if you, take the Latvian case we talked about, if you got people going around saying like, oh, you can increase the price and we'll share the profit we make out of that, then I think you have a serious issue. And it's, in the end, that's taxpayer money that's being spent. So there is that broader picture as well. An important thing to add that's both in Belgium and the Netherlands, they're acted after they got the information from the American authorities, from the FBI. So it's not their own investigation. So what happened is the NSPA apparently told the Americans, like, okay, something's going on and it's too big for us to deal with. And then it came to the Netherlands and to Belgium.
Yeah, that goes to show again the important role that Americans have been playing over the past years and decades in such kind of cases. You know, like and it leaves us wondering what will happen if the U.S. withdraws from corruption enforcement.
In your article, you also cite Chloé Ridel, a French lawmaker, and she told you, we definitely will not let this pass. But I was wondering, do they actually really have the power to not let that pass?
No. Is that a short enough answer?
Be a bit more specific, please.
No, I don't want to be that cynical white man.
No, I mean,
I'll retract my answer and leave this one to Simon.
No, I think it's important that European politicians look at this and, raise their voices. I mean, obviously, a member of the European Parliament has a platform. But, I mean, yes, as Jesse indicated, the European Parliament is the European Parliament. It deals with European affairs and so not directly with NATO. But yes, I think it's important that politicians raise their voices over this.
And especially, I mean, with there is a part of EU spending coming up as well in defense. So it's important that they learn from this and make better rules and stricter rules on that part. On NATO itself, it's going to be complicated. I mean, the European Parliament is allowed to come to the Parliament Assembly of NATO, where they invite all people from different parliaments from NATO member states. I mean, that's a bit of a little talking shop, and they don't really have that much power in there. So no, I'm afraid we have to look to Mark Rutte, the Dutch Secretary General of NATO, who promised that they would get to the bottom of this. But I mean, that was before we knew that the American side of two investigations had been dropped. So it's unlikely that Rutte will to the bottom now.
It was also before Mark Rutte referred to Donald Trump as his daddy. So I don't know if that really allows to make a strong stance here against the US.
On that note, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Jesse and Simon. And Alex and I will be back soon for another episode.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Emma, Alex.
You've listened to the podcast of Follow the Money. Our Watchdog journalism is funded by our members. Subscribe and support European investigative journalism.